So welcome to this webinar on the Residual Special Court Archives for Sierra Leone. And I'm Jens Boel, member of the Executive Board of the Section for Archives and Human Rights of the International Council on Archives. I'll be moderating this webinar. So the Special Court for Sierra Leone was established in 2002 by agreement between the United Nations and the Government of Sierra Leone. It worked until 2013. So we have with us today 3 archivists who are extremely well placed to talk about the archives of this court. Which then since 2013 are preserved by the Residual Special Court for the Sierra Leone. Aminata Kpewa-Allen, and excuse me if I don't pronounce it correctly, but okay, thanks, is an archivist who has worked at the Special Court for Sierra Leone for more than a decade. Faulkner is an archivist specialized in humanitarian archives. She works for the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and has been closely involved with the Sierra Leone Court Archives. Andreas was already in 2009 deployed as an archival consultant for the Special Court of Sierra Leone and has worked with Swiss Peace and its Dealing with the Past program on a number of projects. So after the presentations, there will be a question and answer session, and you can enter your comments or questions in the bottom. There is a Q&R section here at the below on your screen. So you're most welcome. You're invited to come up with any reactions or questions you may have. So we'll start now, and Aminata, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jens, for the introduction. Before I start the presentation, I want to say that the 3 of us, Andreas, Heather, and I, we are part of a bigger team who works with the archives of the Special Court for Sierra Leone. It is not there were a lot of people who contributed to making the Special Court for Sierra Leone have such a memorable collection. So we just want to acknowledge those people. And we are here representing them all. Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So the civil war in Sierra Leone started in yes.
Can you just click on that button to the lower right?
It's the same.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. The civil war in Sierra Leone started in March of 1991, and it was led by a group of rebel insurgents who called themselves the Revolutionary United Front. The war, as you heard from, the war continued till January 2002, when it was formally declared ended, and after a disarmament process. Among the reasons that the rebels gave for invading the country is that the then government, which was a one-party state, was very corrupt, and that the economic situation of the country was really, really bad. So the war raged on in the outskirts of the countries for several years. And then in May of 1997, a group of military personnel who called themselves the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, they invaded the city and ousted the democratically elected president, who was President Ahmed Tijan Kaba. President Kaba had to go into exile in the neighboring country of Guinea, and the AFRC invited the rebels who joined them in the city, and they ruled the nation for about 9 months. When diplomatic negotiations with them failed, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, sent its military wing, which was ECOMOG, into the country to intervene. So ECOMOG succeeded in driving the AFRC and the RUF out of the country, out of the city. But whilst they were going, they conscripted lots of children whom they used as child soldiers. So the RUF and the AFRC went into the outskirts of the country. They went into the bushes, the outskirts of the country, and then the democratic elected President Ahmed Tijan Kaba, was reinstated. So in January of 1999, after the president has been reinstated, the RUF also unleashed another attack on the city. And the RUF and the AFRC, because this time now they were working together. So whenever we talk, we no longer said only RUF, we said RUF and the AFRC, because now they were working together. They unleashed another attack on the city, and succeeded in taking some part of the city from ECOMOG. So after weeks of heavy fighting, ECOMOG succeeded in moving them out of the city, but they left behind about 5,000 people dead, and they took hostage so many other people. So in October of 1999, the United Nations established a peacekeeping mission in the country. And then in May of 2000, the RUF unleashed a widespread attack on the peacekeepers, on the United Nations peacekeepers. Some of them were killed, and some, I think, were taken hostage. So at the request of the President Ahmed Tijan Kaba, in August of 2000, the United Nations Security Council, UN Security Council 1315, authorized the establishment of the Special Court for Sierra Leone. And in January of 2002, an agreement was signed between the United Nations and the government of Sierra Leone on the establishment of the Special Court for Sierra Leone. And this agreement was ratified by the Sierra Leone government that same year in April of 2002. So now, what was the mandate after establishing the Special Court of Sierra Leone? What was their mandate and the function? The mandate of the Special Court for Sierra Leone was to prosecute all those who bore the greatest responsibility for the crimes committed in the country, crimes against humanity and other international humanitarian violations from 30th of November 1996 to 2002. There were 4 cases before the Special Court of Sierra Leone. The RUF case, consisted of 4 indicted persons, and it included a leader of the RUF who was called Corporal Kode Sanko. Unfortunately, Sanko died in custody before the trial began. So only 3 RUF members were tried and convicted in the court. And then there was the AFRC, the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council. Also 4 persons were indicted, and among them was the leader, who was Major Johnny Paul Kroma. But Major Johnny Paul Kroma went missing, and to date, he has not been found. So only 3 persons were tried and convicted in the AFRC case. And then there is the CDF case. CDF was a civil defense force. They were like a task force, civilian task force, who fought side by side with ECOMOG and the government to fight the rebels and the REF. But unfortunately, they also committed series of atrocities. So they were also brought before the Special Court for Sierra Leone because the mandate says all those who bore the greatest responsibility for war crimes in the country. And then the last case, which was the unique case, was the case of Charles Taylor. It was unique because this was the first time in international jurisprudence where a sitting president of a country is being tried for crimes committed in another country, and he has never even been present in that country. But Charles Taylor was a warlord before he became a president. So he had a collaboration with the REF, and he was supplying them arms. So he was also indicted as one who contributed to the crimes in Sierra Leone. So all the three cases, the REF, the AFRC, and the CDF, the cases were tried in Sierra Leone. And it was another first for international law because this was the first time that crimes committed under international law were prosecuted and tried in the country where they were committed. So this was another first. But the case of Charles Taylor, it was decided for security reasons that this case should be moved to the Netherlands because Liberia and Sierra Leone, they are very close to each other. So they decided for security reasons, the case should be moved to the Netherlands. So the case of Charles Taylor was done in the Hague, the Netherlands, while all the other cases were tried in Sierra Leone. The Special Court of Sierra Leone was empowered under international law to prosecute crimes against humanity. And these crimes are but not limited to murder, enslavement, torture, rape, and sexual slavery. And it was also empowered to prosecute crimes against the Sierra Leonean law. For example, abuse of girls, which was under the Cruelty of Children's Act in Sierra Leone, and then the destruction of property, which is under the Malicious Damage Act of Sierra Leone. The Special Court of Sierra Leone was the first hybrid court. And when they said hybrid, it means that both international and domestic laws were used, and even the personnel, international and national personnel were used. There were three organs of the courts, and they have various functions. You have the chambers. The chambers consisted of the judges. They were the ones who were implementing the judicial proceedings of the courts. And you have the office of the prosecutor. They are the ones who were implementing the mandate of the court, which is to bring to justice all those who bore the greatest responsibility for the crimes committed in the courts, in the country. And then you have the registry. The registry is the administrative branch of the court. Its own function is to support the prosecution and the chambers. But under the registry, there was the defense office, and the defense office was there to support the accused persons and to make sure that their rights as accused were not violated under international law. So in total, 9 accused persons were tried and convicted of war crimes in the country. It is important to note that the Special Court of Sierra Leone contributed to the jurisprudence of international law with conviction of the use of child soldiers, forced marriage, sexual slavery, and attacks directed to UN personnel, to UN peacekeepers. I will now hand over the next slide to Andreas.
Thank you, Aminata. I'm happy to follow up here with a short introduction after like the description of what the court was supposed to do, going into the actual archives and archival processes. The court and part of the registry section already had a records unit dealing with the records produced by the court. When it was going more and more towards the closure of the court, I was traveling to Sierra Leone in 2009, so 7 years after the creation of the court. There were already certain aspects in place, of course. As mentioned, the team. I noticed some of the people already in that team at that time are joining the call as well. What we did is follow up on work that has been done. There was a records management system in place at the time when I arrived. We did analysis of the court as such, like what are the functions, once again, to identify the proper the records, the provenance of the records, and the context of the records. Shortly afterwards, Heather, who will be speaking afterwards, was joining the court as well. And one of the main aspects was that while I was kind of working for the registry section, as Aminata has described, like one of the parts of the court, Heather was working for the prosecution, and while the practical work was really separated to keep the confidentiality of these records, we did align, for example, the descriptions to be based on ISG to ensure that there is a minimal consistency of the archives within the court. And of course, there were similar usage of physical storage containers and so on. While it was a hybrid court, so it was not just a UN organization, we were still using and relying quite a bit on already existing material regulations. We didn't invent everything from scratch, but used a lot of stuff that was already available from the UN, such from the arms unit. At the same time, like while we were coming from outside as specialists in certain fields, we did do a lot of training and capacity building on site. It was a collaboration with the National Archives, also to ensure that while we were there to build up capacity to be an ongoing activity and competence also after we were leaving then, but also after the court closes, there are still records on site that need to be managed according to the standards. Yes, we can move on with the slide. Aminata. So, and what we implemented, not from scratch in certain cases, but these are regular archival processes and tasks also, going through the functions of the court to ensure we cover everything. The court has still and had a proper document which was called Rules of Procedure and Evidence, which define very specifically and detailed how to handle like the judicial process, but a lot of the administrative processes, etc., were not as described in the same details or outlined in the same way. So that was kind of the first and foremost task to ensure we can cover everything, all the different units within the registry, chambers, and then move on to actually appraise the records. Appraisal was one aspect which was kind of a challenge, is also given that it's the temporary court and it was rather short-lived, even though it lasted for maybe 10, 11 years. So we had like a lot of temporary records, which we still needed to preserve, and not only like the permanent records. So we need to, even though distinguish between permanent and temporary records, a lot of temporary records also need to be preserved at least for some years after the closure. Transferring records within the court, like from the different units to the archives. I think every one of us has different anecdotes we could describe and bring up here on how records could be transferred both electronically and physically. We needed to build secure repositories. Heather will be able to describe like in detail what that meant, especially for the prosecution from their point of view, for example, while transferring also. The secure repositories was also an aspect for the digital repositories. While we had like one system, one solution that we used for keeping the digital records, we needed to ensure that they were strictly separated for the prosecution, the registry, and the defense records, for example. And as such, of course, we tried to keep the track of all decisions and destructions also that we did, based also on descriptions and from descriptions with IZG. We were using a simple database based on IZG for all these descriptions. Some of you might know Atom by now, was in early stages. We're coming to IT challenges later on. Why, for example, Atom was not possible at that time. I think I will hand on now to actual part of a transfer process or a specific transfer process, and leave it to Heather to describe that.
Thanks, Andreas, and thanks, Aminata, for your great beginning to this presentation as well. Okay, so I joined the Special Court for Sierra Leone in July 2009, whilst the court was in the point where it is starting to close down. So just to give a little bit of context as for the process involved in moving the original records from Sierra Leone to the Netherlands, the special court was downsizing, and all of the trial activity in Freetown was actually completed within 2009. And conversations had been ongoing in the court and in the community of stakeholders around the court as to how best to secure the legacy of the special court for Sierra Leone for the affected communities in Sierra Leone, but also how to best manage the related but distinct residual issues that would require day-to-day management by personnel beyond the closure of the court. Part of the decision-making for this residual issue was to transport the archives of the special court from Freetown to The Hague, where they now reside in the Dutch National Archives. And when I say the archives of the Special Court for Sierra Leone, it's not part of the Special Court for Sierra Leone. It's not just the judicial records. It was the records of the Office of the Prosecutor and the records of the registry and certain records from the chambers as well. So even though there was 3 parts of the court who were preparing their archives separately for transfer, the coordination between the 3 branches was absolutely critical. And it was in this time that Andreas and Aminata and I were working very closely on this, along with some other colleagues who aren't on the call today. So just to give you some of the context that's happening. So with regards to the archives, the legacy aspect, that really involved making sure that the impact of the justice that had been delivered by the tribunal remained accessible to the affected communities and the victims of the war and to future generations of Sierra Leoneans. But with regards to the practical aspects that would remain post-trial, particularly with relation to securing the evidence and witness protection, the security of that record was one of the main concerns that people within the tribunal had at that point. So another couple of things to note is that during the time when the trials were happening in Freetown, the Special Court for Sierra Leone compound was defended by a battalion of armed Mongolian peacekeepers, a force which was withdrawn in 2011 when the need to defend this compound was less critical. And also that the looting of the archives of the East Timor Serious Crimes Unit in 2006 was still reasonably fresh in people's mind, and therefore there was a concern that these archives needed to be preserved in an environment that would not only secure the record for the future, but also to secure the lives of the people who had given witness statements and evidence which was important going forward. So there was no suitable secure archives facility in Sierra Leone at that time in 2010, and there was no budget to create one. I think it's just useful to put that in context, because the decision was then taken to ensure that a complete and certified copy of the public record would be available for the future in the Sierra Leone Peace Museum in Freetown, which Aminata will talk a little bit more about in coming slides. Whereas the originals of the judicial records and of the non-public record, which included evidence and records relating to witness protection, amongst other things, would be transported to the Netherlands for reasons of security and for long-term preservation. Do you want to put on the next slide, Aminata? Okay. So that gave you some context as to why the decision was taken to move this archive from Sierra Leone to The Hague. In terms of the specifics, there were certain constraints that we were working under. So in autumn 2010, the principals agreed a window, quite a brief window, in fact, for the transfer operation, which took place within the court recess between the resting of the defence's case in the Charles Taylor trial and the close of arguments, which was the beginning of the deliberation process by the judges, which was scheduled for early 2011. So we were given more or less 10 weeks notice that we needed to have all of our records ready for transportation by mid-December 2010. Now, this operation, and it was an operation, it was a military operation as well as an archival operation, had four main levels that I could identify. Firstly is the diplomatic level. So the transportation of these archives from West Africa to Northern Europe was an exercise in multilateral international cooperation. And I'm not sure I've seen anything quite like it ever since. And it was a great thing to be a part of and to see it work, people working so well together. So there was a donor government that supplied a military jet for the duration of the operation. The Government of Sierra Leone was obviously very heavily involved, not only in authorizing the departure from the territory, but also in making sure that the infrastructure was available to transport this archive from Freetown to The Hague, including the support of the Sierra Leone police. And of course, the United Nations provided the peacekeepers that secured the convoy on its journey. So that's the first level, the diplomatic level, which needed to be organized as a high level. I wasn't really involved in that. That was more for the principals of the court. But certainly it was a huge effort to bring everybody on the same page to allow this to happen. The second level, which perhaps shouldn't be underestimated, is the logistics level. So one of the first questions that we were asked as archivists, and I was only taking care of the preparation of the part of the Office of the Prosecutor, was to estimate the volume and the weight of the records that would be transported, because in fact this was important to be able to pack the aeroplane correctly in a way that it would be balanced on takeoff. Bearing in mind that at that point there was a great deal of appraisal recommendations, but they only actually became effective once we started to separate out the temporary records from the permanent records, once we'd received the say-so from the prosecutor in the case of the officer I was working in. So we had to make some very quick calculations and say, we reckon we're going to have X number of boxes, and each box weighs this amount of kilograms. And in the end, in fact, those estimates were quite accurate. We had the facilities management section of the court did an incredible job, because they had to create packing crates which were custom made to fit within the hold of this aeroplane. And there was a great deal of sawing and hammering going on in the days before our departure. And I think it was on the previous slide, in fact, you can see a photograph of how these boxes were stacked together in order to create a sort of U-shaped crate that would fit into the belly of the aeroplane, which was really quite impressive to see. And then on top of that, you've got the requisition of trucks, the requisition of a river ferry, and 2 airports, one in Sierra Leone and one in the Netherlands, for the convoy to be able to pass. So, you know, the coordination that goes into an operation like that is actually pretty huge. Related to the logistics level is the security level, which was an operation that was really also very impressive to see. No risks were taken for this convoy to be taken from its very heavily guarded compound in Sierra Leone to get it to the Netherlands. So this convoy, it passed through central Freetown, a very densely populated area. It crossed the Sierra Leone River by boat and then went onto the airport at Lungi by road. And throughout that operation, throughout that journey, it was guarded. The convoy was guarded by the Sierra Leone police and also the Mongolian battalion of the United Nations peacekeepers. And of course, this operation was not announced in advance in order to minimize the security risk to the convoy of records and personnel that were traveling with it. Now, the final level, it's perhaps the one that's most interesting from an archival point of view, is the legal and operational level of this particular operation. Because in accordance with the evidence handling procedures at the Special Court for Sierra Leone, which were based very much on best practice, the chain of custody for the records, and in particular of the evidence that we were transporting as part of the archive of the Office of the Prosecutor, must remain unbroken at all times to eliminate any fragment of possibility of doubt as to the authenticity and the provenance of the evidence that is being transported in those crates. So a huge amount of planning went into the custodianship of these records and what would be required in order to be able to provide that cast iron guarantee that this box that's being transferred into storage in the Netherlands is exactly the same, with the same legal value as the records that had been kept in storage in Sierra Leone. So special security was assigned to the truck that was carrying evidence collections. Tamper-proof seals were applied to all the evidence boxes, and an official custodian was assigned to the operation to travel with the records in order to assure the inviolability of those archives at every step of the journey, which was myself from the Special Court for Sierra Leone compound until an official handover to Aminata at the airport in the Netherlands, after which she took over the job as the custodian of the prosecution collections until their safe installation in the building of the Special Tribunal for Lebanon in Leidschendam. And I believe that we both signed affidavits to that effect, just in case there was anybody who would question whether we'd done it properly, and we absolutely did. Another aspect to remember is that the Charles Taylor trial was not yet over. It was still happening in The Hague, and therefore assuring the business continuity during the 10 weeks that we had to prepare for this transportation and the days following delivery was critical. There was at no point could we say, right, we can lock these these archives up, nobody's going to need them for a couple of months. That's not the case. In fact, the prosecutor said, we don't have archives, we have records, we have active records. We could need any document in any of these boxes any day of the week. So in fact, the only time that those records weren't available was probably during the 48-hour period when those records were actually on the move. And we had very good inventories that would allow us to identify exactly which file was in exactly which box, which was in exactly which crate, and to track the destination of those things at all times. And just finishing up my part of this, just to acknowledge that there was no person working for the Special Court for Sierra Leone at that time in 2010 who was not involved in this operation in some way, shape or form. We had lawyers filling in document transfer forms. We had drivers taking care of destruction of temporary records. We had facilities management colleagues who are constructing these boxes, and senior management steering the diplomatic process through towards its conclusion. And not to mention the respective archives teams putting in some very, very long days and a few weekends and a few long evenings as well. So it was a really incredible operation that I'm grateful to have been part of. And thank you to Andreas for this incredible picture, which brings it all back.
Thank you very much, Heather. That was really good. For the role of the Dutch National Archives to the archives of the Special Court of Sierra Leone. And of course, when the mandate of the Special Court of Sierra Leone finished, a residual mechanism was created to take over the work of the Special Court of Sierra Leone. And that is the current organization, which is the Residual Special Court for Sierra Leone. So as Heather had said, of course, in the agreement, it was agreed that since there was no conducive environment for the archives to stay in Sierra Leone, they were moved to the Netherlands, because according to the article, the originals of the archive should be co-located where the Residual Special Court is. And of course, the Residual Special Court is in both the Netherlands and in Sierra Leone. So for as long as until the parties of the agreement decide to move the archives, or until the Special Court of Sierra Leone, the Residual Special Court of Sierra Leone is no longer in the Netherlands, then there will be thoughts of moving the original archives from the Dutch National Archives. So for now, the Dutch National Archives is the temporary home of the Residual Special Court for Sierra Leone. And of course, they are neighbors to the Nuremberg, the archives of the Nuremberg Tribunal. So for the condition of storage of the archives in the Dutch National Archives, a memorandum of understanding was signed between the government of the Netherlands and the principals of the Special Court for Sierra Leone, Residual Special Court of Sierra Leone, on how the records of the archives of the Special Court for Sierra Leone should be managed in the Dutch National Archives. So now, with all the efforts, the things that went into making the archives of the Special Court of Sierra Leone what it is, of course, there were challenges within that time. So each of us are going to talk about two of the challenges that happened during that time. So I will just hand over to Andreas to talk about his.
I think it's me first, Aminata.
Oh, Heather, sorry.
I got the first couple.
Yeah.
The first one is perhaps quite obvious for War Crimes Tribunal, but whilst most archivists are used to working in a very low risk tolerated environment, working in the Special Court for Sierra Leone was adjusting to a zero risks tolerated environment when the confidentiality of a process is not accepted or trusted at all. until its security has been thoroughly demonstrated. And I totally understand the reason for that, for the reason that, you know, there was even a subdivision within the compound with like a barbed wire area where the office of the prosecutor was working, and people couldn't pass there. And within that, of course, we have locked repositories and things as well. So the security of the archives and the information kept within those archives was pretty absolute. And that required a method of thinking whereby we work with colleagues who are working on the same process as us, but at no point was anybody outside the office of the prosecutor able to look at the records that were being cared for under the work that I was doing. So that was particularly a challenge when we came to digital record keeping, trying to build digital repositories within the records management system that the tribunal had purchased, because it really had to be demonstrated that the system was secure before anybody would agree that a single document could be saved in that system. We got there in the end, but it was something of a process, and took time to demonstrate how security worked in practice. The second bullet point here relating to the operational context, it sounds a little bit bizarre, but we were working in an environment where there was an awful lot going on and not necessarily in the location that you were in. So the Charles Taylor trial was still going on in The Hague during the time that the archives were being prepared. And there were periods where the legal colleagues, for example, were 100% occupied and unavailable and on a different continent. And then there's periods of recess where things can and do move exceptionally quickly indeed, as happened with the decision to relocate the archives from Freetown to The Hague. Fortunately, I was working with colleagues who were very willing to engage with the archival decision making, but that agenda needed to be pushed in order to get us through to the conclusion that we did. And you have to stay flexible and work around the needs of that war crimes trial that's happening at the same time. Okay, handing over to Andreas.
Andreas, yeah.
Thanks, Heather. I mean, building up on that, I think there's many others who have experienced challenges with IT infrastructure. The thing was primarily when arriving in 2009 also, the court, partly because it was a hybrid court, so it didn't just get UN funding. Aminata will get to that point in the resources bullet point here. But a lot of equipment was second-hand. Desktops, for example, there was IT infrastructure was fairly limited, which also was one of the reasons why we didn't use the early Atom software, which was just about being published as 1.0 at that time. It just didn't perform well enough for people to be used around the court on different stations. Internet speed was very limited. I think there was one satellite connection for the court, which ensured like the independent connectivity, but the bandwidth, of course, was very limited. And at the same time, there is like for the recordings of the trials, for example, there were a huge amount of data which need to be processed. There was also a digitization exercise ongoing towards the end, like with intention to have all the records, the paper records, the physical records also available in electronic form. So there was a lot of things going on, and at the same time a very very basic IT infrastructure available for various reasons. Timeline, as mentioned, we were kind of arriving at the court in 2009. The main trials, except for the Charles Taylor case, were mostly done, except for I think one appeal. So it was at a fairly late stage, and at the same time there was still quite quite a lot of work, as in digitization, the concept preparation of all the records ongoing, which put quite a bit of pressure onto the different activities that needed to be performed by the various sections, prosecution, but also registry. I'm sure a number of people here in the call could also add to that. I hand over to Aminata now for doing more specifics about resources.
Yeah, okay. In terms of the resources, of course, we all now know that as the Special Court for Sierra Leone was a hybrid court, so it was not a full UN court, UN organization. It was partly the government organization of the government of Sierra Leone. So resources was very limited. It was not like other full UN organization which are fully funded by the United Nations. The Special Court of Sierra Leone was funded by donor countries, and so the resources was very limited. So that was a challenge, but at the end of it all, Sierra Leoneans are very resilient people. So we were able to make do of the resources that we have, and at the end, we got a great collection. And in terms of the access and legacy, that was also a challenge because it was agreed that the originals of the archives are moving to the Netherlands. So, well, it was also very important that the legacy of the Special Court of Sierra Leone doesn't fade away in Sierra Leone when the originals of the archives move. So there were a lot of talks, there were a lot of strategies to find a way of making access, even though the originals are going to be moved to the Netherlands, but it was right for the Sierra Leonean people to be able to have access to at least the public records. So those were challenges to come to a good conclusion of how it was going to happen and what kind of legacy to live with in the country, because they were, especially like school children now, a lot of them were either not born or they were very young at that time. So it was necessary for a legacy to be in the country where they will understand the history of what happened in the country. But at the end of the day, it was a challenge, but at the end of the day, a beautiful legacy was left. And this is something which continues to live in the heart of Sierra Leoneans, because there is a memorial there which tells the story of the Civil War. So what are the lessons that we learned from all this working as archivists? On the operational level, of course, one of the lessons we learned is the importance of starting an archive process very early within an organization. As you've all heard, Heather and Andreas, they came like midway. So like the actual archival process of the court started midway in following after few years of the work of the operation of the courts. That's when the work of the archive started. But then, of course, it became a challenge because it was several of the record creators, several of those who were like the ones who were very familiar with the records, who were very who would have been able to give a great context to the record. Some of them were no longer in the courts; they have left. So when it was time to put context to some of these records, it was a challenge, and sometimes the archivists have to make decisions on how these records could be described, because the originators of these records, the users of these records, most of them had already left. So it is very important for an archival process to start to grow with the organization, so that users will be able to get used to whatever process is going on, and that if any innovative changes come, they will not reject it, because this is a process this is a continued process which have started with them at the beginning. So they will learn to understand it, and they will be more receptive to whatever strategies are coming to the archival process. And then, of course, it is almost impossible to have a successful archival project without senior management support, because they are the ones who give the resources, they are the ones who approve the strategies and all those things. So it is very, very important to have senior management support. And teamwork cannot be overemphasized. There is no way a single archivist, a single individual can be able to work and make a successful archival collection. There has to be a great teamwork, and that is one thing we had at the Special Court for Sierra Leone. We had a great teamwork. So even when resources were very limited, we were able to work together. So it is very important to have a very good team to work with the process. And of course, the importance of outreach. Just like I said about the legacy, it was important for people to understand about the archives, because it is important for them to know the impact of what the archives is to them. So it is very important for processes to be communicated within the organization. Everybody should be able to understand how the archival process are going, so that work can go on very smoothly among everybody. And then, of course, the importance of the effective digital preservation strategies. It is very important to put in place these strategies, outline them in the beginning of the process, and ensure that all the systems, the records are equipped for long-term preservation in the archives. So these are the operational lessons that we learned. But we all have in the personal lessons that we learned from this working with the archives of the Special Court. For me, the lesson I learned from the personal lesson I learned from working with this, it gave me that I realized the power of records. I realized the power of archives. And of course, I'm coming from a country where records management is very, very poor. We don't have the culture of managing good records. So I learned the lesson that if on an organizational level, an archival process can be so successful, why not on a national level? So that is a very burning desire in my life, in my mind, to advocate for systemized records management, not only in my country, Sierra Leone, but in Africa, because I've come to realize that there is a great connection between good records management and good governance. So for me, it was a desire of mine to see that this work on the national level, not only on the operational level. I'll hand over to Heather to tell us our own personal lesson.
Oh, wow. It's very difficult to follow that, Aminata. I could probably talk for another hour on all the personal lessons that I learned during the time I spent working with a Special Court for Sierra Leone, but I know that we don't have time. So one thing I'll just say, and this comes specifically from my period working at the Special Court for Sierra Leone, but also in some of the other archives that I've worked with, is that, working with archives and evidence of war crimes is challenging. And it's actually not for everyone, given the subject matter in which you're confronted on a daily basis with the worst things humanity can do to each other, and to be confronted with evidence of that can be quite challenging, particularly when you've just arrived in Sierra Leone and you're taking an anti-malarial drug that stops you from sleeping properly. But that's the second lessons learned there. But I guess what I would say is, if you are working in humanitarian archives and you come across material that is unpleasant, I mean, we're dealing with archives of child soldiers, we're dealing with sexual slavery, we're dealing with crimes against humanity. It's difficult reading material. It's really important to have a supportive team and to also have some self-awareness about your limits, because you need to maintain that equilibrium, to avoid burnout. And certainly I would see some people who really would work and work and work and not take a break. And my lesson learned from that is to not be that person, to be that person who can maintain that balance and deal with the material mindfully.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Sorry. Andreas, please.
Yeah, as Heather mentioned, and you as well, I mean, there's many things we've learned on the way. One is to be able to cope with limited resources and, you know, whatever you get at your position on the ground, and you have to do as good as you can and not waste too much energy and time with an ideal that you know would be good but is not possible to achieve. So kind of keeping priorities, knowing what is important and where you can kind of do with less quality but still ensure proper archival work. And the other lesson learned, especially when it comes to these to such a temporary organization, is, you know, the phase when it's actually closing down. And I think for international organizations, there's probably more turnover of staff than with regular companies and organizations. But especially when closing down, I mean, it's just a situation. People are leaving and looking for new jobs, etc. And you have to ensure somehow that you keep the knowledge in the organization until the very end, so that you're not just there without knowing actually what the records are that you're still managing. And I must say, I mean, especially also the teams in Freetown records unit and so on. I mean, it was great to see like people still dedicated to the very end to actually make this work.
Thank you, Andreas. So now, what are the current archival functions and the legacy to the people of Sierra Leone? So, of course, the Residual Special Court for Sierra Leone continues to oversee the legal obligations of the courts after its closure. And these, of course, these legal obligations include contempt of court proceedings if there are any, cause witness protection. There is also supervision of prison sentences, and then of course managing the archives. In terms of managing the archives, the digital preservation strategies are still ongoing, and then of course we still coordinate with the National Archives on the originals to make sure that the originals of the original archives are still in good condition. And then of course the access policy is the holy grail of the Special Court for Sierra Leone. So in terms of requests for information, if they are public records, they are on the website. They can be retrieved from the website. If you have any interest in looking at the public records, a copy of the public records are in Sierra Leone. One of the slides, you can see the boxes all packed up. This is in Sierra Leone. The copies of the public records are there. And then, of course, if the requested person wants a confidential or strictly confidential record, they have to go through, the judges have to decide if it is possible for that person or that entity to have that record or not. That one, a request has to go through the registrar, and who will send it to the judges, and they will decide if it is something that the requested person or the requested entity should have. So in terms of the legacy, there are several legacy projects in this Residual Special Court of Sierra Leone. One of the major ones is the Peace Museum. So a Peace Museum was created in the city, and that is where the copies of the public records, the public archives are. So, and they have sessions where students will come to the Peace Museum, where they will be taught, they will be educated for them to understand the history of what went on in Sierra Leone. Because as I have said previously, maybe some of them were not even born, or even if they were born, they were too young to understand about the war. So the Peace Museum is a place that they come and learn, and there are constant visit of students to the Peace Museum. So you see, these are different students coming to the museum. They are giving a tour of the museum, and they are shown all they are taught the history of the courts through all these monuments that are in the Peace Museum for them to see. So this is the Peace Garden. This is in the Peace Museum, and these are slabs. Each of these slabs represents a district in Sierra Leone. So like it's said here, in memorial of the war dead of Putloko district. This is a district in Sierra Leone. So each district is represented by a slab, and in memory of those who died in that district. So this is the Peace Garden, and then you will see on the side there are a list of names. These are a list of a memory of some of the people who died during the war. So their names are written on the wall of the Peace Garden. And so it's a beautiful tour. Anyone who ever has the opportunity of going to Sierra Leone should visit this Peace Museum, and there you will understand the history of the war in Sierra Leone. So this is a very great legacy which keeps alive the memory of what the Sierra Leoneans went through during that 10 years of civil war. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Aminata, Heather, Andreas. This was absolutely wonderful presentation and fascinating, instructive, very comprehensive. In fact, I think you have a new job. I'm sorry to tell you now, you have to skip the rest because you have a new job. You have to go training new young professionals in Dundee and elsewhere where there are private schools, because I think it's extremely inspiring, and the lessons learned, of course, they reach far beyond the case of Sierra Leone, or even of that type of context. I would say it reaches all over the archival world. So thank you so much for having inspired us. And in fact, I can see in the reactions, well, the first one that came was indeed a request to have a recording of the session, because people want to see it again. It came from Uganda. So I'll just emphasize that the recording of this session, as well as other Tuesday talks, they're all available, or will very soon for this session here, be available on the ICA website. If you go to the section pages, the section for archives and human rights. I'll go to the questions and answers, and indeed, well, I can see it's mostly a reaction, in fact, very positive reaction here. It's Gerald Fewings who is writing that I had never considered the backstory of such an operation. This is fascinating and eye-opening. I can't imagine how the initial conversations and cooperations must have come about, all the levels of mutual trust involved and so forth. This is very, she would highlight the importance of this. And Tom Adamy writes that I only wish these lessons learned would be acknowledged by current international criminal courts who follow a process driven by budget more than any higher level concerns for archival legacy. Well, so you should probably also do training for them. And then Anna Horrod writes, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. A question for Aminata. Which type of outreach was most successful for young Sierra Leoneans in your experience? So we'll begin with this for you, Aminata. Which kind of outreach was for young Sierra Leoneans was most successful?
Thank you. Well, the special courts, one of the greatest success of the special courts is its outreach. It's its outreach, because from the beginning of the trials, there was an outreach section within the office of the registry. So from the beginning of the trial, outreach all over the country, they made sure that people knew about the Special Court of Sierra Leone, why it was existing in Sierra Leone, and why it was important for justice to be done for the victims of the war. So outreach was there from the beginning. For the young Sierra Leoneans, in terms of the legacy now, the frequent visits that students are made to visit the Peace Museum and see the legacy of the history of the war. Having the tour, going to the Peace Garden, seeing the slabs of in memory of the different districts, seeing names of in memory of people who have died on the wall of the garden, and having a tour guide explain to them the history of the war, and even for the public archives, which is housed in the Peace Museum, is another good place that the young Sierra Leoneans can go and try and learn more about the history of the Civil War. So to me, one of the greatest outreach for the young Sierra Leoneans is the Peace Museum, where they can go and learn the history of the war.
Thank you, Aminata. And there's another question, but just before that, I would like to ask a follow-up question here. In fact, you also mentioned the school children before, and you have all talked about the importance of keeping these records available for future generations in Sierra Leone. Well, the Peace Museum seems to be an amazing place, and which attracts many students and young people. But what about those who cannot go to the Peace Museum? I mean, what about in schools in general? Do you have any kind of projects or plans to reach out through curricula? I mean, through school textbooks or manuals, or in other words, through education to the children and young people of Sierra Leone, so they can learn about what has happened, and well, in order to ensure that this will not happen again.
Yeah, well, of course, aside from going to the Peace Museum, the Residual Special Court still has an outreach function. So it still goes to the districts. Personnel of the court still go to the district and educate people about the legacy of the court and all those. But as I said in my lessons learned, what you said, Jens, is something which is very, very dear to me, because I want a situation where this not only the history of the Sierra Leonean war, but I want, even in the school curriculum and with the students, for them to understand the importance of preserving memory, the importance of keeping records in such a way that you will preserve the memory, not only of the war that has occurred, but even for the history of the country and all those kind of things. So of course, that is something which I foresee on the national level. And of course, it has to be in collaboration with international partners, but that is something which is very important, so that it can continue, that younger generations will be able to understand not only the war, but to understand the importance of preserving memory.
Yeah, I think that's a great vision you have. There's a question about something slightly different, about the digital preservation. So the question is, could you say a little bit about the digital preservation strategies that you are following? I don't know whom of you want.
Yes, Heather, anybody?
I can tell you what we did more than a decade ago.
Yeah.
So again, the strategy at the beginning was to try and get the digital content before it disappeared. And that involved sometimes, particularly in the office of the prosecutor, a sort of capstone approach where you say, right, here is the prosecutor, here is the deputy prosecutor, here is the assistant to the prosecutor. If I capture their records, I'm going to get a certain coverage of the decision-making power in this part of the court. In terms of migration of data to other formats, at that time, we didn't do it. We were literally getting hold of things, checking it was accessible and readable, and getting it into HP Trim, which was the system that the tribunal had, this court had bought for this purpose, with the assumption that if we can get it first, hopefully we can preserve it later. My journey with the special court began in 2009 and ended in 2011 when I moved on to a different criminal tribunal. So I can't comment on what's being done now. Maybe Andreas has more knowledge of what's happening these days.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, first and foremost, it was about capturing all the relevant content. And I remember going from unit to unit in 2009 and identifying like not only the office records, etc., but all the various business applications they were having, from, you know, fuel distribution, which of course did also require appraisal. So I don't think we kept that much of the fuel distribution. But I remember the issue with emails, which we were using Lotus Notes at the time, and the difficulties around the technical aspects of that, using that system for the emails and extracting it, but also the discussions around the policy with it. Can you actually take the emails, or how much private correspondence is still in there? That was at the time, and since then, I remember when we also transferred not only the physical records, but also kind of the physical equipment of the digital archives. With that transportation to The Hague, quite a bit of time was also spent on handling the formats, for example, for the video recordings of the trials, but also doing proper PDF versions, for example, and so on. And like, as one of the functions of the Residual Special Court for Sierra Leone, Aminata is the professional here, still working for the archives, is to ensure the accessibility and preservation of the archives. And as such, we're regularly concerned with updating the system again and ensuring that that we can still, that it's up to date and we can read it and we can use it, and the information is accessible.
Yeah, thank you for these replies. And then there are a few more reactions, in fact, from, there are two more from colleagues in Uganda, and I'll just briefly, I'll read them to you. It's Grace Aiken from the Refugee Law Project in Uganda, who writes that she was at the Peace Museum 2 years ago, and I must say, you people did an amazing job. Being an archivist myself, I'm impressed, and this is what I wish for the work we are doing back in Uganda to preserve conflict memory. I would be grateful if we could have a deeper discussion on archiving and sort of get training on this topic, indeed. And then there's another reaction from a colleague in Uganda, Innocent Oiling, who writes, thank you for the insightful presentations. I appreciate how these challenges resonate with our experiences here in Uganda. I'm particularly interested in learning about the various a strategy is employed to address digital preservation concerns, which is what we have just heard about. And then otherwise, maybe also for you, Heather, at the UNHCR, it could maybe be interesting to have a chat with the colleagues from the Refugee Law Project in Uganda. And for us, for the Tuesday talks here, for a future Tuesday talk, it might be interesting to have a focus on Uganda, but this is something we can come back to. And then there is one more question or reaction here. No, it is a question for you from Patrick Otem. Did you ever come across contested narratives of the war? Just a sec. I have difficulty reading this. Just a sec. Okay, sorry. Did you ever come across contested narratives of the war? And if so, did you manage to circumvent it during documentation and curation? My comment is informed from the Uganda's context, where both government and rebels perpetrated violence against the citizens. So, contradictory narratives. In fact, have you come across this, and what have you done to monitor such a situation?
Well, I think in our own case, the mandate says try all those who bear the greatest responsibility. So even though, like the CDF, the Civil Defense Force, they were a task force of civilians who thought that they could help the government to drive away the rebels, to drive away the AFRC. So even though people loved them, people were very happy with what they were doing because they saw that they were defending them as civilians. But when it came to trying those who bear the greatest crime, it was not only those who actually came to cause havoc in the country, like the rebels, the AFRC, but the CDF were also held responsible because even though they were fighting in support of the government, but in the midst of their help, they also committed lots of atrocities. So every faction was indicted before the Special Court of Sierra Leone. So in my own view, I don't think there was any contested narrative because every one of them, those in favor of the government and those, of course, against the government, those who were protecting the civilians, they were all held responsible for crimes they had committed within the mandate of the Special Court. Heather and Andreas, do you want to say anything?
Just one point that I would add, that of course during the trials themselves, the narrative was very rigorously contested by the lawyers representing the accused and the prosecution. So if anybody really wants to know what Charles Taylor's responsibility is for the civil war in Sierra Leone, there is a huge public record of the evidence that was put before the judges by the prosecution and the counter arguments put by his legal team. So in some ways there is a tool here to use to try and get to the truth when somebody says this is a stitch up or it's not correct or I have a different experience of this, to be able to say, well, here we have a reliable record that's been tested in a court of law and not the court of public opinion. And that's what the Justice Project was all about at the end of the day.
Okay, thanks a lot. I mean, all this shows how inspiring your experience is and can still be in the future. There's also another reaction here, encouraging the idea of training, in fact. So one last question, just a sec. I'll just check the box here. Well, there's a reaction. Congratulations. that's very appropriate for this bright presentation from you guys. I cried from beginning to the end when I watched the film Cry Liberia. Cry Liberia. I have learned a lot from you guys. A similar situation is taking place in my country, and as an archivist, I will know how to go about it now then, thanks to you. And this is from the National Archives of Cameroon. So you also get very positive response from there. Maybe well, we will have to close, but still we have 1 minute. I just want to ask you, the child soldiers, I just wonder whether the work you have done, the records that you have collected and the work you have done on this, do you think it can or has it already inspired the work of the UN elsewhere? I mean, in that field, in the efforts of fighting against child soldiers, that terrible phenomenon. Have you any idea on that?
I'm sure it has, because that's one of the successes of the Special Court for Sierra Leone in terms of the child soldiers. So I believe it has an impact on policies of the United Nations, because they see the success of they admire the success of the Special Court for Sierra Leone, and I'm sure they have a lot of lessons have been learned from the way that the Special Courts implemented its judicial procedures.
Thank you so much. And well, time is out now. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to all three of you, and also to Perrine and the ICA Secretariat who were supporting this activity. There will be a new first Tuesday talk in 2 months' time, as usual. It will be on Tuesday, the 4th of June, and the topic will be the French NGO called RTD Carmonde, which is an NGO that has its focus on poverty, on poor people, and work with for and with poor people to change their situation, to empower them. So that is in 2 months' time. But thank you so much for now, and well, have a great evening or rest of the day. All of you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.